Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Tailosive Tech live on YouTube. I'm kicking off today's live stream with a topic about iPhones. Do you guys remember iPhones before this new age we found ourselves in of AI and AI pins and R1s and digital assistants that we tried to talk to and convince them into doing all these things for us? Yeah, way back in the old days, we had these interesting, kind of useful products called iPhones. Little small startup company called Apple still actually makes some of these iPhones, a couple of them every year. They try to sell them to people uh, for whatever reason. And there's been a lot of talk about their lower end, cheaper iPhone, not lately, but I think what I want to divert more attention to is kind of the importance and significance of Apple focusing more on affordable hardware, mainly because, for one, European Union has certain standards that have to be reached by the end of this year, but also it feels like worldwide, whether it's in the U.S. or outside the U.S., um, a lot of companies are a lot of company governments, agencies, that kind of thing, are uncomfortable when it comes to Apple having any kind of software advantages, whether that be you have to get your apps through the App Store, or you have to use our digital assistant, or you have to use our texting app. And Apple wants to have more and more control, of course, over their ecosystem, but they're probably not going to get to keep it. EU is having things go their way. It's very hard to win cases against the government. You can find loopholes, but ultimately, I think that in a world that we might be eventually heading towards, where lots of different governments crack down on what Apple is allowed to software restrict, which is not much, and there's going to be more and more of this push towards everything being cross-compatible, no App Store exclusivity, you have to allow sideloading, you have to allow alt stores, you have to allow software and apps and stuff that you do not manually review. Um, or you have to allow super apps like we see in China. If this trend is to continue, what does Apple really have as an advantage to buying their hardware compared to anyone else? Even if you're not a big believer in this whole AI hype train, which I'm personally not a big one, I don't think that this is as disruptive as people make it out to be. But even if you do believe that it is like the next big wave of innovation or the next big disruptor, like I've heard some people say that the generative AI or large language models is like the next internet, like it's just going to change everything. I don't personally share that opinion, but if you do, maybe Apple's trying to bank on this concept of having really advanced, well designed neural cores built into Apple's own custom silicon, which allegedly no one else is really able to match. TSMC is the manufacturer, but Apple's amazing design team, amazing silicon design team is able to achieve these great efficiency metrics or performance metrics. And maybe more lately, that's going to be leaning harder and harder into neural net training and machine learning, so that they can say, well, our devices can do on board, AI that doesn't require internet connection, that doesn't require as much training data from online, uh, media farming like other sites do. And we're able to do that more locally. So maybe Apple's hoping that they can achieve better AI performance than anybody else through neural cores, which, okay, that's one thing they can fall back on. But I also think if a lot of the world is going to start to become what happens in China, where when we have super apps and software companies can just double down on becoming bigger and bigger software monsters in the industry, and the hardware companies aren't able to restrict anything to just their hardware anymore, then it kind of becomes a battle of price and features. And that's why we notice that a lot of the Chinese phone companies, whether it be Xiaomi or Oppo or whoever, the hardware gets really competitive. They get really fancy cameras, really nice displays at very low pricing, and it's because this is really all they have to compete with. They can't really fall back on any software exclusives or any App Store features like that. It all has to come down to the hardware, which is partly where I think the SE4 might be a sweet spot for Apple moving forward if software isn't going to be their big advantage in the future, or the ecosystem, the walled garden comes crumbling down, and all of Apple's great software features have to be accessible to the masses, and Apple can't software restrict things anymore, then SE4 might be a little bit more important than just, oh, it's another cheap iPhone. Like, yeah, it's a bummer it's not going to be the mini size we all want, but I also think that, for one, getting USB-C on a cheaper iPhone is a big move, but also trying to bring a more premium feel to a more affordable price segment. Uh, it's probably bigger than just SE4. It's also just like Apple's whole pricing structure moving forward might have to be rethought if Apple has to fall back just towards market share, which is kind of what we see with the Chinese smartphone competition currently. Is it's just like, okay, whoever has the best hardware, because you can't win much on software, and then it's just a market share game. How many can you sell? And if you can sell more, then you can afford slimmer margins, so you can afford a lower price, hopefully. So the future might involve a lot of Apple trying to figure out how to price the iPhone a bit more competitively in order to grow market share to be, again, this is like what we talked about. If iOS is basically forced to become more like Android, well, a lot of the best-selling Android phones are the cheapest ones. So if the iPhone realm is starting to become more Android-like, it might involve popular iPhones becoming more affordable, which maybe isn't the worst thing in the world. Thank you, Simply Sora, for 22 months. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling 22. I'm glad I remembered that. You think they will announce the SE this coming event? The rumors are saying no, but I wish they would, personally, just because I feel like it's time. There was 2 years between the SE2 and 3. It's been 2 years since the SE3, so I would say do it, but it's probably not going to happen. Have you noticed that the AI Cyrus uses photo descriptions? Got texted a message and a pic, and Cyrus said, blank texted blank, in an image of red and white signs in front of a tree. I have heard about that. My friend Mike actually had that feature start working for him recently, and it did not work. I think he said his mother sent him a picture of a painting, and Cyrus, who I'm saying to not say the actual S name because I hate how easy it is to set it off now, but Cyrus read it as, your mom sent you a picture of koi fish, and it was not koi fish, it was some plant or something. So it got it wrong. But yes, technically they've started doing that. Why don't they have OLED on MacBooks? Sucks, really. Well, OLED is great, but it does have a set of disadvantages. For one, it's more prone to burn-in, and Macintosh computers tend to have the same things on the display for longer periods of time than a smartphone does. So burn-in is a bigger concern. It's also difficult to get OLED, especially at larger sizes, to be bright enough to match a lot of what Apple expects their Macs to do. So with XDR content, a lot of people expect their MacBooks to be 1,000 nits or maybe up to 1,600 nits with certain content, and it's very difficult to get OLED displays to be that bright and not have burn-in issues. But it sounds like they're making progress, because it sounds like some of this state-of-the-art next-generation OLED tech is going to be shipping next week. Only 1 week to go, guys, till Apple's May 7th event. And apparently using this dual stacked method where you kind of have multiple OLED displays on top of each other. So hopefully that helps alleviate some of the burn-in, and it allows it to appear brighter because each panel is not having to get as individually bright as you would if you just had one panel. So there's some downsides to OLED that they're improving over time with manufacturing and scale. The Apple Silicon iMacs at my school have burn-in from the login screen. Well, they're not OLED, but yeah, they can still have burn-in. Hot take, mini LED is so good on Mac that it'd be better if they just improve them over changing to OLED. Yeah, I agree. I think mini LED, from what I can tell, kind of kills a lot of the noticeable improvements of OLED. If you go from LCD to mini LED, yeah, it's a bit better. It's not quite as good as OLED, but it is better. But then when you go from mini LED to OLED, it doesn't feel like that drastic of a change. I mean, honestly, you kind of have to be a nerd inside the tech bubble to actually be able to notice the difference between LCD and OLED. I know there's display junkies out there that are like, what? It's so noticeable. OLED changes everything. But no, seriously, there's a bunch of average consumers out there that have no idea there's a difference between LCD and OLED. Even if you put the phones side by side, they wouldn't be able to notice. I know this because I've done it with people firsthand. A lot of people do not know. And mini LED definitely makes the transition less noticeable, which is part of the reason I don't plan on upgrading my MacBook anytime soon. Ryan Fraley says, did Tesla cut a bunch of the supercharger team? No, Ryan, that's not true. Don't believe everything you read. Tesla cut the entire supercharger team. As far as we could tell, very high executives at the Tesla supercharger team were let go, as well as pretty much everyone reporting to them. All we have to base any knowledge to believe that there are still members of the supercharger team is that Elon made a tweet claiming Tesla still plans on expanding the supercharger network. That's what we're basing not the entire team was laid off, is based on that tweet, because everyone basically that I've listened to who had contacts at Tesla, that was aware of people that worked at Tesla's charging team, has pretty much been let go, and they were not given much notice, and they are not really understanding why. It's a very confusing situation, which is why I'm personally kind of waiting a little bit. It feels like the story is developing in real time right now. I'll probably do a video on it, but like a lot of people were already starting to record podcasts and post videos about it before Elon had even made statements about it. So it seems like one of those stories that needs to sit for a little longer. Iris told me my mother sent a picture of a pair of toucans. Turned out the photo was a watercolored painting of that she created of 4 colorful fish. 10 out of 10. Would listen to Iris describe images all day. Hopefully she gets better after Dub Dub. Will they revive the dead iPad? What is your take? No, it's the hardware is just going to continue to double down the iPad as... Again, I don't think the iPad is dead. I just think it's not growing. Like the people who have 5-year-old, 6-year-old iPad Pros really don't see any need or reason to upgrade them, because a new iPad doesn't do all that much different from an old iPad. And that's why there's not a lot of growth going on. A lot of people buy tablets for kids or as cash registers for businesses. You know, a lot of people, even if it's not an iPad, will just call any large touchscreen device an iPad, because it's just like the template. Oh yeah, if you're in a situation where it would be nice to have a large touchscreen, people just kind of fall back on the iPad. So I don't think it's dead, but I do think that it could grow a lot more if the software was enhanced in some way, but I don't think Apple's interested in bringing over much Mac functionality to the iPad. They just want to double down as this is for note-taking, this is for drawing, or this is just a fun media consumption device that gets some cool hardware on the Pro models occasionally. When do I think the iPhone 14 Pro series will turn up on Apple certified refurbished? They probably know that it would sell fairly well, so that's probably why they're not doing it, is my guess. Captain of Team Fridge is in the house. That's right. Simply Sora says, I tried showing my dad how amazing my QD OLED monitor is, and he was just like, okay, looks fine, I guess. Exactly. Well, you might notice as you get older and your eyesight gets worse, you'll probably start or stop caring so much about display specs and resolution, because the older you get, kind of the worse your eyes become at detecting that kind of stuff. Let's see. I don't have an iPad and would only buy it if it was more like the Surface Pro with a kickstand. Well, that's a weird reason not to buy it, considering how cheap it is to get a little case that can prop it up and protect it at the same time anyway. But yeah, I don't have my iPad anymore because I felt very much like my iPhone could do everything I was using my iPad for. I do think that the iPad for a long time has been a great way for Apple to kind of experiment with new hardware. I don't know why they can't put it on the Mac first, but for whatever reason, Apple feels more comfortable shipping more state-of-the-art things like these larger, fancier OLED displays we've heard so much about. And the next generation M4 chip sounds pretty likely at this point, if it's a week before the event and Mark Gurman is saying that the iPad Pro is going to ship with M4. Pretty high chance of it happening. Although Mark Gurman, yes, has gotten a lot of things wrong lately. Usually the closer you are to the launch, the more accurate the report. And now that the event is confirmed, it's no longer a speculative thing. I think that we probably will get the first M4 chip, which, like I talked about yesterday, the positive side is okay, the iPad might have some hardware exclusives that it's never had before because the M4 chip is going to have lots of neural cores, and maybe that'll unlock some generative features that we can't fathom yet that Apple's been cooking on for a while. Um, and then the bad news is they probably are rushing it to market, which means in terms of anything other than the neural cores, it's probably not all that different from the M3 chip. Um, well, don't act like the wrong assumption is you're assuming that the M4 chip is like leaps and bounds better than the M3. Honestly, I could be wrong, but if it is true that the M4 is ready next week, which is very quick considering the M3 launched just 6 months ago, it's very, very likely that it's not really using a new manufacturing method, especially if it's in an iPad Pro that doesn't have an adequate heatsink, that doesn't have a great cooling system. It's probably not going to be a fully unlocked M4, which means it sounds like a gun I'm talking about. It's basically means that the performance in regards to the CPU speed, the GPU performance is probably not all that different from a base M3. The only difference is it can do some more AI stuff. So don't think of it as, why would they put an M4 in an iPad? That's so powerful. It's like, yeah, it's probably a side grade from the M3, not an upgrade from the M3. I mean, it's technically still better, yes, than the M3, but not in like CPU, GPU tasks, not necessarily a big leap in efficiency tasks, but just more on device AI learning stuff. I don't think it's just low sales from previous. There's a reason why they're pushing it out early. Yeah, I think they probably have seen the whole AI hype train that's been blowing up in the media lately. Just the quick valuation OpenAI was able to achieve. And they feel like, oh, well, if you want big investment to come into your brand, then you have to have some kind of AI emphasis. So Apple's trying to catch up in some way and branding it as a new chip as M4 and saying that it's, AI enhanced, or like my joke, it's Apple intelligence. It's a marketing ploy. It's not necessarily like a note. The difference between the M3 and the M4 might be smaller than the M1 to the M2 or the M2 to the M3. It might be the smallest year-over-year chip upgrade because technically it is the shortest amount of time between release cycles. 1 week from today we'll have our answers. Let's see. The M4 is a technique to ensure high sales of the iPad while not providing macOS operating systems. Think about it. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good theory, is that if Apple has some really cool generative AI features that only work on the M4, they will suddenly convince a bunch of journalists and YouTubers and people in the tech community to go out and buy, this $1,600 OLED display, because there are rumored to be price hikes with this OLED iPad, because it is using some state-of-the-art display. Will it be that noticeably better than Mini LED? Will it be that useful? Probably not. But they're going to convince a bunch of us to drop big money on this iPad, which, if it weren't for the AI focus and if it weren't for the M4 chip, a lot of people would just say, okay, the display is nice, but it's still an iPad, so what's the big deal? But if they build in some of these generative AI features and say, we're launching this first in an iPad, and in order to access these features, you have to buy this new iPad because no Mac has the M4 chip yet, that'll probably move a lot of inventory on a very expensive tablet, especially if they're going to be shipping it with the new Magic Keyboard, which is rumored to be more aluminum build, a bit higher quality. Who knows? That might make it more expensive. So these could be very, very high margin devices that they're prioritizing all of their new AI features in. What that actually looks like. Again, I still struggle to understand what relatable functional use cases that Apple's thought of. I don't know, but I've been surprised before. Apple has sometimes been known to unveil something, both a software feature or a hardware feature, that makes me go, wow, I didn't know I wanted that. I didn't think I needed that, but now after trying it, it's actually pretty useful. Would the AI features come to the next iPhone? Probably. Yeah, I bet there's a huge emphasis to double down on these neural cores on the A18 chip, but I'm sure they will still technically work on current day silicon. It'll just probably work a lot better, or Apple could tease or release certain features that they claim you need the latest silicon for. Um, I'm excited for the iPhone SE. What about you? Yeah, I think it'd be the perfect phone for my wife, and if Apple wants to maintain a certain amount of market share without the ecosystem advantages anymore, which sounds like the corner that a lot of the world's governments are going to push Apple into. I do think they might need to double down and try harder to make better value phones. And the SE4 might be the first step in that direction where, hey, here's a cheaper iPhone that still has an OLED display, still can have Face ID, still has a great camera, has USB-C, maybe has an action button, instead of the current SE, which is very much like an incredibly dated iPhone that is just a recycled design from 2017, which is 7 years old now, but they just put a new chip in it. It might be a little bit more creative than that with the silicon they put inside and the camera and stuff. Um, Hey, Dad. Dad's in the chat. Hope your old man understand what advantages new hardware will bring if AI is available through the internet, free, and doing stuff on my old Apple hardware. Yeah, it's a great point, and I think that's the main differentiating feature Apple's trying to double down on, which, again, I'm struggling to contemplate because I agree with you, Dad. Most of the cool AI features people know about are available through the web, and that's kind of my biggest complaint with a lot of these AI hardware products that are coming out is there's nothing that exclusive to the hardware. They just have access to a certain software stack that they're shipping in this hardware, but anybody could really do the same thing. So Apple's hoping with their custom silicon, just like how we transitioned away from the Intel processors to Apple Silicon, that by having their own neural cores, which are basically a part of a processor that's designated to machine learning and neural net training, that they're able to unlock AI features that wouldn't be so dependent on the internet, that can do more things locally or more privately or more securely, that don't steal as much data maybe as current AI engines do. Or yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate this or articulate it. But yeah, you can tell I'm not great at explaining how Apple's going to come up with AI features. I don't know. Randy kind of explained it fairly well on the Tech Podcast that AI is it's not a new technology. It's just kind of a hyped up new branding terminology, because neural cores are also not a new thing. Apple's had neural cores since I think the A11 chip or the A12 chip, which is on the iPhone 12. So it's been around for several years. iPhone 11 as well. So as an example, that feature on our iPhones that I think I've showed to you, Dad, that lets you press hard on the subject. Like if there's a picture of you, I think for you, it was like you were on your motorcycle. And I was just like, okay, I want to put my dad riding his motorcycle on Mars. So in the Photos app, I'm able to just select that photo, lift the subject out of it, and then I can move it to another photo and layer it on top of each other. I didn't have to, download a specific app to do that. I could just lift it and turn it into a sticker. Now that's a feature that requires, I believe it's the A12 chip or later, or the A13 chip or later. So if your iPhone doesn't have an A12 chip, it's unable to support that feature. So that's just a present day example of like something that Apple claims requires a certain amount of neural cores to activate. There could be more features like that I'm just struggling to fathom. But AI isn't new, but Apple making a big deal about it makes people talk. Yeah, and it's not just Apple. OpenAI is probably the company that mainstreamed a lot of the talk about it and gathered a lot of investor money from it, and that's why companies like Rabbit and Humane are trying to hijack this hype train, or monetize this hype train the best they can. But again, both of them, I think the problem is they're trying to reinvent the wheel. They're thinking that, well, AI is this incredibly amazing technology, so it allows us to rethink the form factor of computers. And it's like, I don't think you really need to rethink the form factor. It's just a cool new feature that computers will have. It's kind of like foldables in a way. Like a lot of people thought, oh wow, with folding tech, all phones are going to do this. In reality, it's like, not really. I mean, some will occasionally, but for the most part, everybody's still just buying a rectangle. Um, if I can buy a gaming laptop that allows me to play games and has an OLED display and a fast Windows 11 system, why would I buy a boring Mac? I agree. Don't if you want to buy a I don't know, it's different tools for different things. If your goal is to buy a sports car because you like going really fast, don't buy an F-150. You know, you're not going to go super fast. But if you want a vehicle for work and you want bed space or you want good ground clearance, then buy a truck that has those things. It's just different to it doesn't make it a bad product, it's just it's not for what the use case is. Um, but yeah, if you're going for gaming, Max has never been the go-to. We need a funny AI inspired skit on one of your next vids. I thought the last one was kind of AI focused, but how long do I think the 14 Pro Max will last getting new features? Usually 7 to 8 years since their launch, so probably another 6 years from now. I don't think AI is advanced enough to really be useful. It's a bit gimmicky right now. I think that's my problem with it is it often has the illusion of doing something really impressive, but it's not quite perfect, just like how Marquez showed in both his AI pin review and the R1 review. It still makes pretty obvious mistakes where it's like, oh yeah, I know what plant that is, or oh yeah, I know when the next eclipse is, or I know how much fat is in an avocado, and it tells you these things and they're just wrong, but because it says them confidently, people are impressed by them. And that's kind of what AI is good at, is like, it's impressive if you don't know much about the field it's talking about. But if you do know about those little details, you do see the mistakes it makes. And a lot of people say, okay, well, that's just it right now, but in a few years it'll be perfect. And then it never quite gets to perfect. That's just a fundamental, consistent issue I've seen with most generative AI projects is they get better than they used to be and they show really great progress, but it never quite stretches over to the realm of perfect. Okay, now it's doing its intended task flawlessly, or good enough to be disruptive. When it comes to AI, it's feeding on a whole different thing. It's not a technology that it's advanced. It's data that it can manipulate to understand certain complex tasks, including emotional. Interesting. Um, Emotional damage. Yeah, if full self-driving is confidently uncertain, then AI is confidently incorrect. Yeah, as long as it sounds confident, it's impressive, right? I don't know. AI is good at yapping to people who don't know anything about the subject. Yeah, I think people notice that. If you ask it about something you're not very well experienced in, then you'll go, wow, that was impressive. But then if you ask it about something you know a lot about, you'll go, well, no, that's not right, or that didn't make sense. So like all kinds of new tech that we find, it's a tool. It helps a little bit here and there. I don't think it's going away. I don't think AI is a fad in the same way that 5G is a fad. It's like, it's not really 5G, I don't think is exactly accurate to call a fad, but I would say it's like overhyped, yes. Like, is it as disruptive as it was made out to be? No. A lot of people were claiming 5G was going to just revolutionize everything and change the way we use our tech. In reality, it's just, a little bit faster speeds for our phones. It's not like a fundamental rethinking of what our phones can do. I remember in the early days they were saying 5G is going to allow for more remote surgeries and autonomous driving cars will be unlocked through 5G. And it was like, what are you talking about? Is any company planning on building autonomous car software off of the 5G network? I haven't seen that to be the case. But there were all these promises, and what actually happened was like, there's some faster speeds. And I think that's what AI is. It's another level of smart coding. It's digital assistants getting a little bit more context aware, but it's not like, oh, we don't even need the phone anymore because the AI has gotten so good. It's like, the AI will enhance the phone experience, but it won't replace it. AI hype will last longer than the Vision Pro hype, but that isn't saying much. Well, Vision Pro is one piece of hardware. AI is a much broader general topic. Uh, what do I think about this AI app store? What about it? Do you mean like the large action models? Um, that says AI made some cool pictures for me, but it seems to avoid things people would know, like faces. Right. Again, if you're just playing around with it for a few minutes, it's kind of cool and impressive. But then once you get specific or you really want it to show something, you quickly within an hour will bump against the edge cases and go, okay, it's not good at that. It's not good at that. But Brandon, Ethan, thank you so much for joining Tailosive Tech Plus. Hope you enjoy. Especially a lot more lately, I've been doing early access videos for the channel members. So thank you guys for your support. Very kind of you. Do you remember when you made a video giving Apple suggestions to save the iPad? Why didn't Timmy listen to you? Oh, I know, right? Is his answer, which no one thought of, the M4 and AI shows that Apple knows better? Um, I mean, Apple knows better. That's not a debate. They're running the company and they're bringing in billions of dollars, and I'm just some guy in shorts in my office talking to my phone. I don't think I know better than anybody. I hope that's made abundantly clear. I like sharing my opinions on things, but I've been wrong a lot, and I'll happily admit things I'm wrong about, and I'll be happy to suggest things, as I think everybody is entitled to an opinion and should feel free to suggest things. I don't think that means any one person knows better than Apple does, but if you can support your opinions or support your viewpoint with logic or reasoning and can articulate it in a way that people find convincing, it can climb its way up the ladder. Like I was advocating for USB-C on the iPhone for years before Apple actually did it. I remember talking about why USB-C on the iPhone would make so much sense even before the leaks or rumors were coming. I remember when everyone said, no, Drew, they're never going to put Type-C on the iPhone because they're just going to go portless. It doesn't make sense to go Type-C. Long before the EU was trying to pass a law, I just kept saying it would make far more sense to have one port for our Macs and our phones and just have one cable, and it's bilateral and reversible, and it can do so much more. It can move more power. It can move more data. I was suggesting this. Does that mean I knew better than Apple? Apple was probably aware of all of these advantages. They were just probably trying to be somewhat strategic about the adoption of it. But they could have different reasons for not wanting to improve the iPad, whether it's from product cannibalization or wanting to keep a product's identity more clear and concise. They're clearly making plenty of money, so I don't think I'm like, if they did everything I say, they would be so much bigger. They're a $2 trillion company now, but they could be a $4 trillion company. I don't think it's that simple, but Portless Challenge never took off. I did it for like 2 years. How long have I been on YouTube? Watching or making? I've been making videos since like 2008. I've been watching videos since, I guess it was about that time too. Remember when the leak said the iPhone 10 would get wireless charging without being on a pad at a certain distance? Yeah, there was a long talk for a while about doing charging over the air. Everybody thought that tech was around the corner, and it just turned out it wasn't. It just kind of fizzled out, which I've seen that kind of revolutionary technology and stuff people claim is around the corner, and then it just isn't. And I have a hard time getting excited for certain technology because I'm just like, yeah, this is uncharted territory. We don't know if it's actually going to be that capable, or we don't know if it's certain things like full self-driving or, having a chat bot do everything for you. Even if the chat bot could do everything for me, I don't think people would like that. I just genuinely don't think people want to talk to an assistant all day. Seriously. Like, some voice assistant stuff is handy, but sometimes people just want a display. I mean, think of how much time people spend on Instagram and TikTok. It's probably too much, and yes, they're addicted to their phones. We'll probably have less time on TikTok soon. But that's not, I think, just going to be suddenly replaced by a little pin that can do everything for you. Even if it was flawless. Even if you could talk to it just like a person, and it was just like the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson, and you just had this little designated personality that was just like a human that understood all your context, never misunderstood you. Even then, I think people would still want a phone. I think people want that display so they can look at charts, look at graphs, look at their calendar. They like having a UI. They don't want to have to ask someone for everything. Um, and that's assuming that the chatbot is flawless. It is far from it. Um, let's see. It was to practice for the day Apple would remove the port completely, but never did. Well, I think legally they probably ran into more issues than technologically. I think the main problem with going portless was that it didn't really help much. It caused a bunch of new problems, but it didn't unlock much new functionality. It's hard to sell people, especially when every year Apple's struggling to figure out how do we justify people upgrading their phone. How do we come up with a reason for people to upgrade? If you start taking away something that's as useful and as vital as a port, which can get faster and get data improvements and faster charging, if you take that away and just say, okay, now your old phone has a port and your new phone won't, then people just won't upgrade. So it's hard to market portless as a feature. Um, let's see. 2 point. What are you guys saying? 2.4 thousand videos? That's just on this channel. I'm about to hit 1,000 videos on the EV channel too. How much will the price difference be of the rumored anti-glare screen on the iPad Pro? So that was a report from Weibo. I'm not entirely sure I believe it. It wasn't a super reputable source. But if it is real, probably like $100. That's what it was for the Pro Display. What if you could teach it how to make videos on their own, at least the routine parts? I would love that. I really hope that becomes a feature. I don't know if it will be. And again, like most AI features, it would probably be really good for 80% of the work. But then the last 20%, it would just fall short, and then I'd have to take over again. Um, but yeah, that would honestly be the most compelling, for my line of work especially, the most compelling generative AI feature I could see is if there was a teaching mode where I could just say, "Watch what I do here. I'm gonna call this training program editing a tech video," and it just watches me edit tech videos over and over and over again. And after running that teaching mode for like, I don't know how much data it needs, 10 times, 20 times, 15 times, it could eventually just edit a video for me. Yes, I would love that. Doesn't sound like a feature they would give away for free. They're probably going to say I need to buy a new MacBook to unlock this feature because my M1 Max can't do it. Or they would turn it into like a Final Cut Pro membership thing. You got to spend $30 a month to unlock AI editing. Um, I don't know. There could be other features like that. If you could, I don't know. My dad is a writer. He's written a couple books, and if maybe you could use generative AI on your phone or your Mac or whatever to just say, what do I need to do to format this book for publishing on Amazon or publishing on Kindle, or what if the AI could do all of that for you? Okay, I'm ready to publish my book, or help me come up with a creative cover for my book or something like that. I don't know. The fact that AI is trying to become more human-like shows us that human interaction is still the goal. Any other style of interface or new way of interacting online will not likely be very popular. Well, I mean, I would just look at it as like, look at texting versus phone calls. Isn't texting just so much more convenient? I mean, that's why you guys are in the live chat right now. It's because it would not be convenient for all of you guys to send a voice message to me and have me listen to every single one. That would be ridiculous and it would take forever. But it's more convenient for you to text someone so that they can see the text when they're ready. They don't have to stop what they're doing and answer the phone and talk to you. There's more human interaction with the phone call, but there's a lot of convenience and privacy benefits to the texting. You could be in a public place or you could be around other people and send a text, and you don't have to worry about your microphone picking up the wrong things or misunderstanding the context. Um, I think that a lot of generative AI features probably come across as more impressive when it sounds more like a human you're interacting with, but I still have not been that impressed with anything I've seen with the Humane AI pin or the Rabbit R1. They all just feel like slightly more gimmicky versions of the digital assistants we already have, like the Google Assistant or Alexa or Cortana or whatever you want to call it. It's just like, oh, it's that, but with a large language model. So I don't see it as incredibly disruptive or that useful. Um, it would really be game changing to me if we could stop with this whole hold the button down, say the command, release the button. Let me think about that. Let me get back to you. Okay, here's the answer. No, it I would be far more captivated if it was just as natural of a conversation flow as a human being. Like you're talking on the phone with a person. That's it. There's so many little micro behaviors, micro mannerisms. I don't know what you call it. There's so many differences when you have just two humans interacting with each other, even if it's over the phone on a phone call, that isn't there with a digital assistant because you're constantly paranoid or worried that, oh, if I like this person is going to confuse it, or if I phrase it in a certain way, it's going to misunderstand the question. Let me re-articulate the question. And I still think we're so far away from having like what happened in that movie, Her, with Joaquin Phoenix. Don't worry, our AI hardware will be better later. Every VC startup. Yeah. Hi, Nick, by the way. Good to see you. Long time no see. Um, did you limit yourself focusing only on Apple? Also, how come they haven't invited you to an event? I talk way too much about leaks and rumors, and I complain about Apple a lot, so I don't blame them at all for not inviting me. Secondly, I would not go to the events if I was invited. If I was invited, I'm not an event guy. I enjoy watching events from the comfort of my own home. Um, nonverbal cues. Thank you. There's unwritten rules about speech and communication that it's very difficult to pick up on anytime we try to communicate with AI. Um, AI is software, that's true, for the most part. The future of Vision Pro equals a tech landfill. Yeah, I mean, I understand. Vision Pro has a lot of limitations, but so did the first iPhone. Okay. What's your honest opinion on the future of Vision Pro? It seems like the hype has died down. I expected the hype to die down, and honestly, I think Apple did too. Um, it's a $3,500 product. I don't think Apple is stupid. I think they have a firm understanding on what products are popular. I think there's a reason they restricted it to just the United States because they knew that this is far too expensive and far too early for it to be a mass market adopted thing. The point was to lay the groundwork and to get feedback from customers to figure out what to prioritize for the next gen, because they've obviously been developing this thing for probably close to a decade. So now that it's out, they know what the biggest issues are that need to be addressed for the next generation. It's going to take its time. But Apple's got lots of money and they got lots of time. So it's not one of those things that's like they have to scrap the whole thing. The HomePod isn't even dead. And look how poorly that did. Remember when it released in early 2018 and we were like, oh man, it has all these problems and all these software limitations. Come on, when is Apple going to fix this? You would have thought that'd be scrapped, but then like years later they said, actually, no, let's just do another one. Here's a cheaper one. But then they refreshed the big one too. Didn't really fix any of our concerns with it, but they're still making them. And they found their little niche. But I think, honestly, spatial computing is a lot more interesting than a HomePod. But honestly, wouldn't a HomePod be the perfect place to ship a new AI-powered thing? If we're going to have like a voice assistant that is way more capable than, I don't know, anything else we have, why not ship that in a HomePod? Especially with these AI pins with like, okay, it's overheating and it's on your clothes and that gets awkward and uncomfortable and the battery dies. Why not build it into a device that doesn't have a battery first? And if it's going to be speech focused, then I'm kind of surprised we haven't had that accessory yet. Let's build ChatGPT or let's build Gemini into, a Nest speaker or a Amazon Echo speaker. Let's see. You just bought a HomePod today. Hey, congratulations. I laughed at Bitcoin buyers 10 years ago. I showed them how to stay poor. There you go. AI hardware is the current version of the 2018 blockchain hype. Very much. I agree with that. It feels absolutely like early crypto days. Except Apple is actually getting a lot more into it than they ever got into crypto. Um, I would go to an event, but being an Apple sheet pays. I just I don't know. There's certain events I would like to attend, but not that kind. I like EV events. I've been to a few, not like unveilings, not like a Tesla event, anything major or big, but I've met up with startups and did little owners club meetups, and the more people focused ones are more fun for me. Um, but also smaller ones because usually the more people, the less personal it is, and those Apple events usually have a lot of people, and I don't like that. So I'm not on Tim Cook's nice list. That's right. Um, let's see. I think Apple just wanted to get some money back from all the R&D they did for the Vision Pro. That's probably true, and they also wanted likely some manufacturing exercise. I think Tim Cook is probably very passionate about the future of spatial computing, and likely realized that it's going to take time to figure out how to mass produce an incredibly complex, intricate device like this. And, releasing it and getting the public's feedback on it helps you understand, okay, should we double down on improving the eyesight display and making that better? Or is most of our customers saying, you don't need that, probably just scrap it, you'd be fine without it? You don't really know what the mass markets are going to say about this stuff until you actually release it. There's only so much internal, secretive, under the table testing and sampling you can do from potential customers. Uh, so if you don't release it at some point, you're not going to know what direction or what things should you prioritize. And now all of this data and all of this info that we're getting from Vision Pro customers and reviewers is probably going to help Apple refine and improve the next generation, which, again, this happens with every first-gen product. The first-gen Apple product is rarely very good. Usually it's the most terrible one. The worst iPhone is the first one. The worst Apple Watch is the first one. The worst iPad is the first one. So the worst Vision OS device is the Vision Pro, which is why I don't have it. Tim Cook is a numbers guy. He isn't passionate about anything other than growing Apple's profits. Personally, I know some people like to demonize people like that. I tend not to. I mean, there's still a lot of things Tim Cook has done that I disagree with, but I do think even if you were completely off the record and you had signed an NDA and you were off camera, off microphone, on a walk somewhere by the beach with Tim Cook, and y'all are just hanging out and you were getting to know him better, I think he's genuinely passionate about making good products and services. I don't think, personally, most CEOs of companies, I mean, some are probably more self-serving than others, but I would be willing to bet that Tim Cook, in his heart of hearts, genuinely cares about making impactful, useful hardware. Even though I kind of despise Elon Musk and disagree with him on a bunch of stuff, and I think he's kind of destroying Tesla right now, I still don't think in his heart of hearts he's trying to think, how do I get more money out of people? I don't think it's that. I think we may disagree on what the best things for the future of certain brands or companies are. I think a big miss is Apple not doubling down on the EV industry. Tim Cook probably sees pursuing the mixed reality spatial computing space as more safe because a lot of the technology can translate and be carried over from what they've learned from smartphones. Smartphones, refining them and improving them over the past few decade has involved a lot of improving cameras, improving image signal processors, improving silicon to be more efficient, more powerful, and all of that in display tech also getting better, eye tracking getting better, infrared with the true depth camera system, LiDAR, all of the things they've taken and learned from the iPhone probably carries over and helps a lot with the development of, computers that we wear on our face. All of that tech in the iPhone or in the Mac doesn't translate and help that much in the EV space, but I do think that the EV space is a lot more interesting and has a lot more room to grow and is honestly just a lot more interesting / hopeful than the spatial computing space, which is, okay, if this goes great and it turns out to be the next big thing, and maybe it doesn't necessarily replace our phones, but if it replaces everything else, the best case scenario for Apple Vision Pro and the Meta Quest and everything is a future where everybody wears goggles on our faces. And that's the norm. We get used to that. Everybody walking around like this and sharing things virtually. And we get to the point where we can't even go through our day without wearing a pair of goggles on our face. That's the best case scenario if it all goes well. And it's intuitive and it's fun and it's easy to share things. Okay, we've got the best software, we got the best hardware, but it still just kind of sounds dystopian and depressing and like, well, okay, this is the future we live in now. Everybody's got to strap a screen to their eyes. Whereas I think the potential of the EV industry is a lot more exciting, or a lot more hopeful, of like, how do we find cleaner, more sustainable forms of transportation, independent transportation. Of course, public transport should be there if possible, but in many places it's not possible, or it's not feasible, or it's not practical. So let's make the transportation we do have that's independent for, cargo or moving families around. And, sometimes you don't want to take your whole family on a bus or a train because you like having some privacy, or you want to go to a place at a certain time of the day where the bus or the train isn't available, whatever. Developing products that bring joy and more affordability to the transportation sector, especially as living costs are growing. More and more people are moving away from the bigger cities. Commutes are getting longer because people have to move further away from their work in order to find more affordable housing. So how we alleviate that, tech companies can't do much about the rising cost of living. They can't do much about the, rising cost of real estate or rising rent prices because of, limited space with apartment buildings or whatever. The housing crisis is a whole nother can of worms that there's really not much tech companies can do about. But what I would say big tech companies could probably help the most with is reducing the cost of vehicle ownership or independent, sustainable transportation. And Apple seems to have a pretty passionate interest in the environment. So if I had a chance to talk with Tim, I would still personally have disagreed that scrapping the Apple Car project was the right move. Whether or not Apple should develop their own car or buy out an existing startup, I would have said would be the far more exciting, far more hopeful, far more interesting direction for the company to go. They obviously have chosen not to go in that direction, which I think is a missed opportunity, but I still don't think in his heart of hearts he's doing this because, I need more money. There is a certain level of, we got to play it safe. You don't want to be too risky. You've got a lot of shareholders. You don't want to burn through too much cash, and you're a big ship now, so it's just naturally harder to navigate a company of that size. So I can disagree with CEOs and still think that, what they believe they're doing is the right thing. And they can be wrong. They could have bought Fisker. Whew, you're right. Thank God they didn't. It's cool for China to have a super app, but we can't. Well, there's two different governments. How's my running going without an Apple Watch to track GPS? When did I say I was running? No, I haven't been running for a while. I go on walks sometimes. What was your first iPhone? My first phone was the 5, back in 2012, I believe. That was a while back. Honestly, who's really hyped on the iPad event? Dub will be way more interesting. Yeah, but probably. It's probably not going to be a very long keynote, especially because they're having it at 7 in the morning. I wouldn't be shocked if it's one of those like 40-minute events. The vision I see for AI is being able to say, Cyrus, add 4 pounds 90-10 ground beef to my shopping list. Oh, and also about a pound of Mexican-style shredded cheese, and have her do it properly. Yeah, I've noticed that too. People, if you're using a digital assistant and you say or oh, and also, just everything falls apart. And it's like, that's not natural. That's not how humans talk, especially to other people. If you have coworkers, you're not communicating with them like perfectly and never adding a carry-on or making a pause where most digital assistants now, if you pause, they think, oh, he's done talking. Let me process everything he just said. But no, getting to the point where we could actually process in real time to be like, oh no, that thought is probably unfinished. But even then, there's little nonverbal cues where the facial expression I'm making might imply that I'm not done talking. Even if verbally it may sound like I'm done, I may finish a sentence. Uh, but that doesn't mean my thought has been completed. So that doesn't, keep listening depending on facial expression, given context. If you're a human, you pick up on these things pretty easily, but a computer is like, no more words. Okay, stop listening. VR tech won't really take off, in my opinion, until the tech can fit in a regular pair of glasses, because ain't nobody walking around with goggles on their face all day. I think there's a middle ground. I don't think that hardware will ever get good enough for super lightweight, comfortable glasses, but I do think it can get far lighter and far more fashionable and comfortable than what it is today. I think ski goggles is probably going to be the sweet spot. People wear ski goggles sometimes, especially in colder climates, and it can be somewhat fashionable. It's kind of reflective. You still have a strap going to the back, but it's not quite as lightweight as a pair of glasses, which is just going to be insanely difficult to get a good battery life and good processing power in something that light and small, which might not ever happen, possibly. I have the Apple TV 4th gen. Is it worth upgrading to the latest version, in your opinion? I didn't know there was a 5th gen. It depends how it's working for you. Is it working fine? Then don't upgrade it. And then if it is having problems, what kind of problems are they? Would another one fix it? Was Google Assistant much better than Cyrus when you tried the Pixel 8, or did you still not have much of a use case for it? Yeah, I guess I've never been a big fan of digital assistants in general, just because I always feel like they expect way too much perfection when it comes to articulation. They still don't know basic tasks. I actually still, to this day, use the Google Assistant more than Cyrus because we have the Google speakers in our house. My wife uses them. My family uses them. I use them occasionally. And the Google Assistant still makes pretty dumb mistakes. I do think the Google Assistant is probably the best of the digital assistants out there. It's probably the fastest and usually provides the most amount of context. But I don't think the gap is as wide as most YouTubers make it out to be. I mean, most of them act like the Google Assistant is amazing and can do all these things, and Cyrus is worthless and can't do anything. And I'm like, they're all pretty worthless, but the Google Assistant is better. Yeah. I would always say that, like, they're too finicky, they're too unreliable for me to want to use it every time. I'm saying Cyrus instead of Siri. I don't want to say Siri because it sets off people's devices now, which is annoying. Will there be an Apple Ring like Samsung does? There's some patents, but I don't think they'll release it personally. I think it would take away too many Apple Watch sales. Do I think a big YouTuber can make or break a small company? Not really. I mean, I agree with kind of what Marquez said in his video about reviewers. All a reviewer really does is accelerate timelines, because what a good reviewer does is buy a product and talk about it so that others don't have to. Especially if it's a bad product. If a YouTuber goes out, buys the product, and adequately reviews it and finds all of its shortcomings, Odessa, yeah, finds all of its drawbacks and says, I don't think this is worth it. And the audience just goes, yeah, I trust him. He's served me right in the past, or he's adequately reviewed products previously, so I'm going to continue to trust him. If a reviewer is a well-known, not known for being wrong, or it'd be one thing if a reviewer was saying crazy things about a product and how horrible it was, and no other reviewer was saying the same thing. But that's not really the case. That's not usually what people are arguing about. Most people are arguing, oh, Marquez killed such and such company. It's like every issue, every complaint Marquez had was also echoed by probably dozens of other reviewers and journalists. He was by far not the only person claiming these things. Now, he is one of the most popular tech YouTubers, um, probably one of the most well-known tech YouTubers. So he probably gets a lot of the blunt of the impact, which used to just be, oh, the media was hard on this product. And now it's just like, well, Marquez was hard on this product. And it's like, lots of people who bought and owned the Fisker Ocean were complaining about all kinds of software issues, service issues, key fob issues, communication issues. Marquez was honestly one of the last people to report it. But because he was so noteworthy, everyone said, oh, it's his fault. It's like, no, if the product is genuinely good, then there will be positive reviews out there too. And then the reviewer that is all negative and cynical about it, he'll be the odd man out, and he will potentially risk / lose his credibility by saying something that either wasn't true or didn't have enough context added to it of, okay, well, maybe your experience was bad, or you were not great at explaining the product's use case. But that doesn't mean the product itself is bad, because lots of other reviewers tried it and enjoyed it. But when all the reviewers are kind of reporting the same thing, that's when it's like, no, this is not the reviewer's fault. And also, if the product was genuinely good, it could withhold a few negative critiques, because if it's genuinely good, there's got to be at least some content creators, journalists, or YouTubers that are able to highlight how good of a product it is. There's got to be some element of integrity, you would think. I don't think like everybody's just trying to kill these startups. In fact, I think Marquez and other reviewers like him were probably far more fair and reasonable to these products than I would have been. I didn't even buy them because I was like, I could just look at that on a web page and say, of course that's a waste of time. That's a joke of a product. Of course, it's not even worth considering reviewing. It's not worth my time. It's just a waste of time. Marquez was nice enough to give it a shot and try to figure out if there's a reason to review these, or is there a market for this kind of product. He said far more nice things about them than I ever would have said. So I think he's more than fair, personally. But do you think Apple should give the user the opportunity to give Cyrus a name if you're choosing? Yeah, sure, why not? I don't know if it's that simple, but why are there so many Fandroids and Rose make fun of the SE4 having 60 hertz and not 120 hertz? Well, it's natural. It is totally natural, because there are so many Androids that have 120 hertz. They don't mention that it's locked at 120 hertz and you have to choose between 60 and 120, and they're not usually variable refresh rate, which means that if Apple did put 120 hertz on the SE in the same way that all of their cheap Androids they're bragging about did, it would probably have worse battery life. And the vast majority of the public doesn't really notice or care about the difference between 60 and 120. We have proven this time and time again. So out of the box, it should probably default to 60 so that the battery life is better. But then again, if it's not an LTPO variable refresh rate display, if you clocked it up to 120, the battery life would be worse. So a lot of people would probably just not activate that feature. If you're a techie person that cares about that kind of feature, you're probably not intended for that market. The tech community can be a dumpster fire, but I would disagree, Alpha. I would say it's always been a dumpster fire. It's been a dumpster fire for a while. It cuts both ways. If Marquez covered up flaws and praised the AI pin and rabbit, people would buy it and be mad at him for lying about the flaws. I'd say that'd be far worse, honestly. If you're selling a product to the masses, a reviewer, I think, is far more responsible for what their audience thinks of their review. And yeah, if he would have said positive things and kind of not focused on the drawbacks and just said, this is a great product, you should go out and try it, and then a bunch of people went out and bought it and were disappointed, that's a much bigger loss, in my opinion, than a company failing because, the product wasn't that great and it was hard to justify. This is how the business world works. I don't think it's any different than it used to be. Maybe things move a little faster now because we can get the word out very quick, and a reviewer can get a hold of a product pretty early on, review it in detail, and talk about all of its shortcomings and flaws and advantages, and post their video, and we can all watch that video much quicker than maybe a company could back in the 80s when they released a new product. But the same the same conclusions would have been met. The company who made the good product would stick around because they built street credibility and they had a positive experience, and the media reported on that. And then the bad products that weren't very good would carry a negative stench, and the media would eventually publish stories on it, and that would affect sales. Nothing's changed in that regard. We've just gotten faster at it. But in the same way, startups can also do things faster now too, because they have access to more tools and more information, more internet, and they can get funding faster. So everything's just moving faster than it used to, but it's the same thing. Rabbit box makes a good paperweight. I'm just honestly, genuinely shocked that both the Humane AI pin and the Rabbit R1, I'm shocked that both of them got an MKBHD review. They got like mainstream media coverage. Both of these things were reviewed like a new iPhone had just come out. I'm like, I just looking at them, just watching people use them in commercials or on the website, it's so bad. It's so obviously like a gimmick and a quick like, how do we capitalize on this hype? I'm just shocked so many people gave it a chance. I'm just so surprised so many people were like, well, we'll need to try it first to see if it's worth it. I was like, really? Do you though? I don't know. It'd be kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Someone was saying, hey, I discovered I can drop bowling balls on my head. I'd be like, I don't think that's a good idea. And they'd be like, well, have you tried it? Later you should try dropping a bowling ball on your head and see what it's like. And I'd be like, no, I've never tried it, but I can just connect the dots and figure out that probably wouldn't be a fun activity. And then imagine if they went on Good Morning America and all the news anchors were like, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to drop bowling balls on our heads because this company said it's a good idea. So let's try it. And then they tried it and went, this wasn't a great idea. Have you guys seen Napoleon Dynamite? There's a scene after he tries the time machine. He puts in the crystals and it like shocks him and tases him. And he goes, it's a piece of crap. It doesn't work. And then Uncle Rico walks in the room and he goes, well, I could have told you that. And that's how I'm kind of feeling whenever I watch these reviews about the AI products. Hey, this isn't very good. Well, I could have told you that. Could have told you that the second I saw that thing. Of course it's a horrible idea. I think the SE4 will have 4 gigs of RAM or 6, probably 4. If it's a mass market everyday consumer phone, they probably won't go too crazy with it. Yeah, the Tide Pod challenge. I don't know. Have you tried a Tide Pod? Don't dock it till you try it. It's like, no, I'm going to dock it without trying it. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's true. Never underestimate the power of stupidity. Like Sandy Munro once said, we have ways to measure intelligence with like degrees or resume building with real life job experience or IQ tests. We have ways to measure how smart people are. But stupidity knows no bounds. It's a bottomless pit. There's no stupidity test. We have no way to measure how dumb people can be. The real question is, can you throw a football a quarter mile? Well, back in 82, I could. M1 iPad Pro is a way better deal until iPadOS is upgraded. Well, we're going to find out, I think. I got a feeling that tonight's going to be a good night. No, sorry. Honestly, I have a feeling that DubDub is going to involve a lot of software locking. I think there's probably going to be a lot of iPadOS features that apparently need newer silicon, and suddenly the M1 chip won't be able to run the cool new feature. Don't believe me? This exact same thing happened with the A12Z chip, which was right before the M1 chip, where they said, hey, by the way, the M1 can do Stage Manager and external monitor support. And with the A12Z, they were like, no, it's just too slow. They can't do it. You could do more on an iPhone 4S than a Humane and a Rabbit pin. Yeah, it's kind of exactly what Dave 2D said in his review. He was like, if I was designing it, I'd make the screen bigger, I'd add a volume rocker, and I'd move the dial, get rid of that. I'd put the camera on the front and maybe a camera on the back and maybe improve the speakers on the top. Oh, that's a phone. Wait a second. Remember the Ginger or It by Dean Kamen? That got lots of hype and then died. I don't remember the Ginger. But yeah, there's certainly a hype that it tends to feel like if it grows fast, it dies fast. Um, can we talk about the EU and the iPad? It's kind of the same thing. Hopefully, the EU might make the iPad a much better product, if I'm being honest. They allow side loading. Apple, just allow Mac OS on the iPad. That's your workaround. That way you can say, okay, see, the Mac has side loading. You just got to boot it into Mac OS mode. Boom. Um, Hopefully they will give it all because it's an M chip. That's a lot of wishful thinking. There's not really a big difference between the M1 and what would have been the A14X. Really, the A12X and the A12Z are just early. That's the M0 chip. It's the same concept. They're both like 10 to 15 watt chips with a certain amount of performance cores and efficiency cores and a slightly larger die than the iPhone chip. No thoughts on Beats Solo 4, sorry. More Beats, whatever. How do we make a phone without making a phone? Honestly, that's kind of exactly the first time I saw the Rabbit R1. I was like, this isn't good, but it's way better than the Humane Pin, for one. But also for two, it's just a really goofy phone. They're trying to tell you it's not a phone so that you're okay with a really bad UI and design lacking a bunch of basic features. I mean, it's the weirdest phone I've ever seen in a while. But at the end of the day, it's a device with a camera, with some buttons and a screen that you talk to, that you can type on, that you charge and put in your pocket. It's not a good phone, but it's just a really bad phone. Why doesn't Apple give the iOS features to iPadOS? I think we've talked about it, and I've heard from I know a few people who work at Apple, actually, and it sounds like I'm right in the suspicion that there's not really an iPadOS team. There's an iOS team that at the last second, occasionally, a certain portion of the iOS team has to update the iPad to catch up, which is why it often feels like iOS does a bunch of stuff, and then iPadOS has to catch up a year later. They ship dev kits with A12Z. No one allowed to say it is a bad SoC. Yeah, just that it can't do certain things. To be fair, the dev kit did have way more RAM than the iPad Pros did, but still, I agree. I just noticed the refurbished site has far less iPads than it used to. Wonder if that means they're joining the site next week. I don't think, I mean, I hate using the term confirmed. But it's probably going to be an iPad event. I mean, it's been over 500 days. There's an Apple Pencil in the invite. I would be very shocked if there's no new iPads at this event. Comparing the AI pin to dropping a bowling ball on your head isn't a fair comparison. Oh, I disagree, Mike. I think it's very similar. Honestly, it's like, I mean, are you going to buy one? That would help your argument a lot if you planned on purchasing one. The very fact that you haven't pre-ordered one, to me, speaks volumes to how even you could admit you haven't tried it and it's not worth it. You didn't have to try it to reach that conclusion. At least a bowling ball has a purpose. That's true. Bowling ball is probably a lot more fun. You just don't drop it on your head. Same reason I wouldn't put a projector with a battery that dies in 2 hours on my clothes. What got me laughing about the Rabbit is in Dave 2D's review is that it has a functional touch screen. You can type on-screen keyboard, but you have to scroll the wheel to scroll the settings screen. I know. I mean, personally, I get why they're doing that, but it's still dumb. I agree. The logic behind it is they're trying to make it a voice-focused device, but the very fact that they have to software lock it like that, because it's like, yeah, sometimes you're in situations where you don't want to have to say everything you're doing out loud. Sometimes it's really handy to just have that little screen on your phone that lets you navigate a really complex UI and do what you need to do. Aren't you glad that you can just put your water pitcher in your fridge, Mike, and it fills it up with water, and you don't have to tell it? Fill the pitcher up with water. Drew always says this to Mike, whether it's AI pin or Dodge Daytime. Well, I mean, it is true. I would say it means a lot more if someone who owns the product believes in it and is recommending it and saying, yeah, I paid with my own money for this thing and this is useful and I plan on using this regularly. That's one thing. But to just say, hypothetically, this is worth it, but I'm not going to do it. It's like, I don't know. What got me laughing, oh, sorry, I read that. When the iPad 11 or iPad Mini 7 getting dropped, possibly next week. It could be just one big iPad event. Which iteration of Thunderbolt will the new iPad Pro have? Probably the same version, if I'm being honest. But I got to get going here. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Thank you for your support. The water pitcher is a nice feature. And I love that you don't have to say anything for it to work. It just works. I'll see you guys later. Have an excellent rest of your day. Bye-bye.